Hello and welcome to Live Notes, an introduction to Imperial College's Lunchtime concert series run by the Blyth Centre for Music and Visual Arts. My name is Stephen Goss. I'm Professor of Composition at the University of Surrey, and today I'm going to introduce Gary Ryan's programme. I'm a guitarist myself, and I've known Gary since we were students together at the Royal Academy of Music back in the 1980s. Today's programme comprises Bach's Cello Suite No. I, BWV 1007, and some of Gary's own arrangements of folk songs. I'll be talking to Gary about his arrangements in a few minutes, but first I'd like to tell you a little about the Bach Cello Suite. Bach wrote his 6 suites for solo cello and his 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin around 1720, while he was Kapellmeister in Curtin. They're incredibly virtuosic pieces and would have stretched even the finest players of the day. Bach himself was a violinist as well as a keyboard player, but it seems very unlikely he'd have been able to play his solo sonatas and partitas. So why are we hearing a cello suite played on the guitar today? Bach did write some music for lute, after all. But the music for lute is not particularly idiomatic on a plucked string instrument. Bach didn't play the lute himself, even though he owned one, and never wrote down music using lute tablature. He tended to write his music for lute using an instrument called a Lautenwerk, which was a kind of lute harpsichord, a sort of hybrid instrument which had the sort of sound of a lute, but was basically a keyboard instrument. Bach himself transcribed many of his own pieces for other forces, often adding bits of harmony if he was transcribing a violin piece for keyboard and so on. Indeed, some of his lute suites are in fact transcriptions of other suites. The what we call lute suite BWV 995 is just a transcription that Bach made of his own cello suite No. 5, and the lute suite No. 4 in E major, Bach transcribed his violin partita in E major. So it's not unusual to hear these pieces on other instruments, and as you'll hear today, Gary has transformed the music to fit the guitar very comfortably, and in fact when you hear it a little later you sort of won't believe it wasn't originally written for guitar. The suite itself, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 in G major, resembles a kind of English suite in structure, and that was a suite that would have 4 standard movements: an Allemande, a Courante, a Sarabande and a Gigue. But in the first cello suite, Bach adds a prelude at the beginning. This is probably his most well-known solo instrumental piece, if not one of his most well-known pieces. The prelude from the first cello suite is the kind of thing you hear everywhere. I'm sure you'll recognize it if you don't think you know it already. As well as the prelude, Bach is adding a pair of minuets just before the Gigue. So the whole suite has 6 movements: the prelude, the Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, the pair of minuets, and the Gigue at the end. Now Gary has transposed the suite from G major, the original key, to C major, and used an unorthodox tuning. I asked him why. Hi Gary, nice to see you again.
Hi Steve.
So as we've just heard, you're playing Bach's first cello suite, originally in G major for cello, but you're playing in C major on guitar with a very special tuning. Can you just show us how that tuning works?
Yeah, sure. I've got quite interested in the last couple of years in exploring tunings with a C and a G on the 6th and the 5th string. So the sound of the guitar with this tuning is as follows: C in the bass, G on the 5th string, 4th string, top 3 strings as normal. So if you're playing in the key of C major, it gives you a very rich sonority with the tonic in the bass, the dominant on the 5th string, and of course you've got the 3rd of the tonic triad as an open E. So it sort of makes the guitar quite open. The flip side, of course, is that you have to learn the piece with the notes in a slightly different location down in the bass, but you get used to it quite quickly. Actually, it feels quite natural and quite idiomatic.
And how does that sound compare with the standard tuning of a guitar?
The standard tuning on this guitar, hopefully if it's stayed in tune, so you've got the standard tuning really in fourths with 1/3, So the bottom two strings have obviously come down quite a long way from the standard guitar tuning.
So in your concert today, what was normally an E string is now a C string, and what was normally an A string is now a G string, giving a completely different resonance to the instrument. And that kind of fits in nicely with these folk song arrangements that you've done, because you've used that tuning for some of those, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I mean, I think it just feels very natural. There's something quite nice about playing with fifths in the bass. You've got a C, a G, and a D, and then you go up to the G, which is very, very close to the cello tuning. If we altered the third string to an A, you would have cello tuning down in the bass. So in some senses, as you know, there's a sort of relationship, I always think, between the cello and the guitar. They're not that dissimilar in some senses in terms of the pitch of the instrument. And I just felt that it gave you more options when transcribing and arranging for having lovely low bass line and also being able to reach the upper parts of the instrument in a kind of quite expansive way that's not unlike the spacing I might have if I play on the keyboard. It sort of feels a little bit like that, although I think that's more subconscious than intentional.
And tell us about the folk songs you've chosen to arrange, and why you've chosen these particular ones, and if they have any kind of personal history for you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in some ways, they are heritage tunes that I've always loved and enjoyed, and really just wanted a vehicle to be able to play in concerts as well. The catalyst for writing the set, I've done about 10 of them so far, was doing a Swedish folk tune, which I wrote for a festival out in Sweden in Arvika, and that was called Värmlandsvisen, and I really enjoyed arranging that. And just gradually then started to get ideas for different tunes which I enjoyed. So the ones I'm going to play today were, or the ones I performed today were Pokarekare Ana, Shenandoah, Morning is Broken, Simple Gifts and Scarborough Fair. And in some ways the reason I chose those was also because of the tuning issues following on from the Bach. Obviously I could keep the same tuning down in the bass and then explore it in a folk idiom as opposed to a Baroque idiom.
And those tunes come from all over the world, basically, from as far afield as North America, New Zealand, England, of course. What made you choose these particular sort of geographic locations?
I mean, sometimes there was a connection from having visited or played there. I mean, I was in New Zealand in 2018. I actually heard somebody perform that particular tune, Pokarekare Ana, in a associated board examination, actually sing it. It was incredibly beautiful, actually, which you often find sometimes at the lower grades. People sing, and you can have an amazing exam where somebody will perform and sort of inspire you to go and search out a tune that you're not familiar with, which was nice. Morning is Broken and Simple Gifts were tunes which I loved from primary school. Scarborough Fair was just a melody which I've always really, really liked, and Shenandoah, ditto really. It just has a lovely feeling, very evocative for me of that I don't know, American folk style, if you like. When I was a kid, one of the first tunes I ever learnt was Home on the Range, which I think in a strange in a strange kind of way has gone on to influence everything I've done at some level. I'm not quite sure why.
That's a whole interview in that topic alone, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there was something, I've heard you talk about folk music before, and there's something very sort of poetic you say about the kind of timelessness of this music. Would you like to sort of share with us your thoughts about folk music in general?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I just feel that it's very interesting because you can't always trace it back right to the very beginning. It has a slight sort of mystery about it, a bit like things like Stonehenge. We don't quite know how they came to be, and sometimes folk tunes have become a bit like that. They've been performed and played, and sort of the ownership of them is much wider than any one individual. Lots of people shaping them and changing them and altering them. So there's something quite geographical, almost like a rock in a stream that gets shaped, or a cliff at the sea that's getting changed and eroded by the waves. The melody sort of gradually becomes shaped over time into something that's often subtly different, but at some level we always recognise it wherever it's performed.
No, that's a fascinating way of looking at it. And I think we're all very much looking forward to your performance today, to hear the Bach Suite to begin with, followed by this wonderful set of folk songs in this extraordinarily rich and beautiful tuning with the low C and the G on the guitar. So thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks.
Well, now you've had a little insight into Gary's program and his arrangements. I hope you enjoyed the performance, and do tune in for the Blyth Centre's other lunchtime concerts. Thank you very much.
came from this exploration of various folk tunes, and I got very interested and absorbed in using this tuning, this low tuning in the bass. And quite often when I was tuning up, the notes that I would tune to were the first three notes of the Bach Prelude. So I started messing around in that key, thinking it could work really well. And it's an interesting analogy with the sort of origins of the early preludes, which often started from slightly improvisatory beginnings, a bit like tuning up and checking and playing your way in. So there's a sort of connection between the Bach and the folk tunes in many ways. And I chose a set of 5 using this tuning, starting off with Shenandoah, then it was Morning Has Broken, Pokarekare Ana from New Zealand, and then an arrangement of Scarborough Fair, which is the newest of the set, and then the final one, Simple Gifts, the shaker tune. Sometimes people know it as Lord of the Dance from hymn tunes. I used to play the organ in a local church for many years, so it was a good excuse just to try and arrange some of the tunes and melodies which I really enjoyed playing, and just to be able to perform them in public. The first one that I composed was actually for a Swedish student of mine called Johan Löfving, and he suggested a Swedish folk tune, which I then arranged for a festival out in Sweden in Arvika, and then the whole set sort of grew from those beginnings. I may put my glasses on.
thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to come and play to some people again in real life, as opposed to just virtually, but thank you very much if you checked in remotely for the concert. And I'll finish with the final of my set of 10 folk arrangements, which was an arrangement of Vaughan Williams' Linden Lea, which is a depiction of the Dorset countryside, something which I think everybody missed a lot during lockdown. Sometimes when the strings are tuned down, they spend the whole time wanting to come back up again, and when they're tuned up, they spend the whole time wanting to go down again. So I'll just let them settle a little bit. told when studying never to apologise for your performance in advance, but I apologise if my strings drift slightly out of tune during this next piece. This is a slightly unusual little mini encore in the form of what I consider will probably become a folk song in hundreds of years' time, and it comes from the 1980s. And some of you may remember a band called Tears for Fears, and a great singer-songwriter called Roland Warzewald. I think I pronounced that correctly anyway. And I decided to arrange Mad World for various reasons that I thought hopefully are reasonably clear after what we've gone through in the last 6 months.